Name is Chris Kirchgessner, and this is my final reflection video for my Greece lesson plan. So overall, I got some great feedback from my mentor teacher and the students on where I could improve this lesson. The biggest thing that I'll take away from this first lesson is increasing wait time. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the moment, and even veteran teachers can tell you this, and get so excited about the material um, that you kind of don't give the proper time to students to really think through these questions, because again, we've been doing this for so long. But this is kind of the beginning portion of my lesson. It goes through Ohio's learning standards for history. So a change I made after my lesson is I added the reading history standards, because I thought that was important given that this was a reading lesson, even though I only needed to meet the history requirement. Some of them were like analyzing, like similar to like a history standard 3, analyzing the maps with text with it. And that's kind of what we did during the lesson as well, for a future lesson. But for this lesson, we didn't focus on the maps, but I did go over a quick portion of maps. So this connects to other plans because students were learning about how the Greek societies were run, and then they learned about Rome, and they learned about other civilizations past that as well. So it really connects to everything they're doing with these ancient civilizations. And then assessing them, I added just for this portion, they were creating a spectrum graph. So basically, they had these achievements like astronomy, math, that Greeks contributed, and they went through like specific thinkers like Archimedes and the contributions they had, and they were going through and ranking each topic in a organizer. So like if they think math is the most important to today and to our society, then they would rank that 1. And then they'd go through astronomy and the 5 topics that I assigned them just for time reasons, and they'd go through and kind of rank those. So I added this line that says, historians use knowledge of the present to make sense of the past and vice versa. So the reason I added this was because I thought it was very important to show the reflection of the lesson. The whole lesson was kind of about how does this kind of contribute to what we know now, and why is each of these topics important. So if they can really get that key statement for the assessment portion, it kind of solidifies their thinking of the objective as well. So briefly, this goes over some key terms that they had for the lesson, which includes biology and geometry. I showed pictures of like architecture that I thought was cool. I didn't end up incorporating that part in the lesson for sake of time. A lot of this, when I was planning it out, I was like, oh, I can do this, oh, I can do this, but when you're actually there and you only have 40 whatever minutes, you don't have time to do all that you think you're going to do. So it is important to allocate what time and segment the time for what each part of the lesson is going to be, or you think it's going to be. But once I got into the groove, a couple class periods, it was pretty easy for me to get into allocating the time as I was going. But for this, I just changed the wording of my objective. So instead of saying they should know ways, I said identify ways. That's more specific. Instead of saying no ways, well, how do you know if they know? Or no could mean anything. They could think they know, but do they really? So identifying the ways that Greek society shaped the modern society we live in, that really makes that obvious, identifiable, testable objective. So for this portion, it was just my theoretical and research support. So really the only thing I added here after the lesson and feedback, I just kind of gave an explanation for the Vygotskian principles that we all know so well to this point. So I added kind of like the ZPD part just to give a little more background and emphasis on that part of my lesson and support. So for the opening, asking the background about what they know already about Athens and Greece, as they did go over that prior. And I did see those lessons as well. And then really the only change from these two lines for introduction or hook for the introduction to the new material, I guess I anticipated some confusion over the spectrum graph, and I did explain it, but giving that solid example of here's where I would rank them as a hypothetical and here's why really would help them, and that only takes maybe a few minutes extra of your time. So that's something that I really see the value in. Sometimes it's better to over-explain than going around to all the groups and explaining individually. I also did that if they didn't get it, but you see my point. Really the big thing I want to emphasize with the active engagement portion is emphasizing kind of how they choose to read it. So I explained to read as a partner read. So some of them like had one person read a line or read a paragraph and then do it as they go, or some of them kind of skim read through the text to look for that material that they needed to answer the questions as they best saw fit. But the biggest thing that I added after or changed is the proximity portion. It really was so useful to go around the room from group to group as they were doing this so I could clear up any misunderstandings, and it really helped the students understand it better as well when I did that. So I want to emphasize that again and again and again, proximity. It's so useful rather than just, and sometimes it's good to give them independent exploration, which they kind of had, but just making sure you're always right there answering questions can help and help some groups stay on track. You don't always have to do that, but. And finally, for the closing and differentiation portion, really the only thing I added here was lowering the time for the closing, because I didn't have as much time, like I've said before, for the closing, and then for differentiation being more specific with how to address specific maybe problems really isn't the good word, but for students who may need the extra attention, I guess is a better way of explaining it. That is kind of how I changed that portion, just being more specific. And that was a breakdown of my lesson. Thank you.